Sarah Matthews, a 27-year-old graphic designer from Denver, Colorado, thought she had found peace with her complicated family dynamics after her father remarried Claire, a manipulative woman obsessed with social status and appearances. For years, Sarah endured Claire's passive-aggressive comments and deliberate exclusion from family events, while her father remained willfully blind to his new wife's behavior. Everything comes to a head during a New Year's Eve dinner party at their upscale home, where Claire publicly humiliates Sarah in front of prominent guests, calling her a disappointment and suggesting she's only good for manual labor, jobs. But when the family lawyer arrives the next morning to read an unexpected codicil to her late grandfather's will, one that Claire knew nothing about, the tables turn dramatically. Sarah discovers she's inherited her grandfather's entire real estate empire, worth millions, while Claire's carefully constructed world of luxury and control crumbles around her. This is a story of family betrayal, unexpected inheritance, and the sweet satisfaction of watching karma unfold in the most spectacular way possible. My name is Sarah Matthews, and I'm 27 years old. I never imagined that a New Year's Eve dinner would become the catalyst for the biggest transformation of my life. But sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor about timing. The December air in Denver was crisp and biting as I pulled up to my father's house in the affluent Cherry Creek neighborhood. The sprawling Tudor-style mansion was lit up like a Christmas display, with golden light spilling from every window and luxury cars lining the circular driveway. This wasn't just any family dinner. This was one of Claire's elaborate social performances, designed to impress her circle of wealthy friends and establish her position as the perfect hostess and stepmother. Claire had been my stepmother for 5 years, ever since she married my father 2 years after my mother's death from cancer. At 42, she was stunning in that calculated way that money can buy. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes, and a smile that never quite reached her cold blue eyes. She had married my father, Richard Matthews, a successful construction company owner, but I always suspected she was more interested in his bank account than his heart. I rang the doorbell, smoothing down my simple black dress, the nicest thing I owned on my graphic designer salary. Through the ornate glass panels, I could see the house was already filled with guests, all dressed in expensive evening wear, champagne glasses glinting in the soft lighting. Claire opened the door, her smile faltering slightly when she saw me. "Oh, Sarah, you made it." Her tone suggested she'd been hoping otherwise. She was wearing a stunning emerald green gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent, with diamonds sparkling at her throat and ears. "Hi, Claire. Thank you for inviting me." I stepped inside, immediately feeling underdressed among the sea of designer outfits and jewelry that could finance a small car. "Well, we couldn't very well have a family dinner without Richard's daughter, could we?" Her laugh was musical but sharp. "Though I wasn't sure you'd be able to get the time off from your… what is it you do again? Something with computers?" "I'm a graphic designer," I replied, handing her the bottle of wine I'd brought, a mid-range Cabernet that had stretched my budget but felt necessary for the occasion. "How lovely," she said, barely glancing at the bottle before handing it to the hired server. "Do try to mingle, dear, though I'm not sure how much you'll have in common with our guests. They're all quite successful in their fields." The barb hit its mark, but I forced a smile. This was Claire's specialty, delivering insults wrapped in concern, making it impossible to call her out without looking oversensitive. I found my father in his study surrounded by a group of men discussing golf handicaps and stock portfolios. Richard Matthews was 55, tall and distinguished with graying hair and kind eyes that had grown distant since his remarriage. When he saw me, his face brightened genuinely. "Sarah, there's my girl." He embraced me warmly, and for a moment I felt like I belonged here. "Gentlemen, this is my daughter, Sarah. She's an artist, very talented." "Graphic designer, Dad," I corrected gently, but I appreciated his pride. One of the men, whom I recognized as Mr. Patterson from the country club, smiled politely. "And what company do you work for, Sarah?" "I freelance mostly. Small businesses, local restaurants, that sort of thing." I caught the subtle exchange of glances between the men, the look that said struggling artist without words. Claire appeared beside my father as if summoned by some invisible signal. "Sarah's still finding her way," she said with that practiced smile. "Not everyone can be as focused as your Jennifer, Mr. Patterson. I heard she just made partner at the law firm." The comparison stung because it was unnecessary and deliberate. Jennifer Patterson and I had gone to high school together, but our paths had diverged dramatically. While she'd gone to law school on her family's dime, I'd worked my way through art school with student loans I was still paying off. Different paths for different people, my father said diplomatically, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. He never knew how to handle Claire's subtle cruelties. The evening continued in this vein, Claire introducing me to guests with faint praise that somehow managed to diminish me, steering conversations away from my interests, and positioning herself as the devoted stepmother dealing with a difficult stepdaughter. I found myself retreating to corners, nursing the same glass of wine for an hour, and checking my phone for escape routes. But the real humiliation came during dinner. Claire had seated me at the far end of the long mahogany dining table, away from the main conversation but close enough to hear every word. The dining room was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, fine china, and an elaborate centerpiece of white orchids that probably cost more than my grocery budget for a month. The guests were discussing their children's accomplishments, medical school, law firms, successful businesses, European vacations. I tried to eat quietly, hoping to remain invisible, when Claire's voice cut through the conversation like a knife. "You know, we've been so blessed with how well our social circle's children have turned out," she said, her gaze deliberately finding mine. "Successful careers, beautiful homes, families of their own. It makes me appreciate even more how challenging it must be for parents whose children are still searching." Mrs. Whitfield, the wife of a prominent banker, followed Claire's gaze to me. "Oh, is this your stepdaughter? The one you mentioned who's having trouble finding her direction?" My face burned. Claire had been discussing my life, my struggles with her friends like I was some cautionary tale. "Sarah's 27 and still doing freelance work," Claire continued, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Bless her heart, she tries so hard, but some people just aren't cut out for traditional success. We keep hoping she'll find something more stable. Maybe she could work as a secretary somewhere, or perhaps retail. Something suited to her particular skill set." The words hit me like physical blows. Around the table, I could see the mixture of pity and judgment in the guests' faces. These were people who valued status and achievement above all else, and Claire had just painted me as the family failure. "Manual labor might be good for her," added Mrs. Patterson with a knowing nod. "Some people are just more suited to working with their hands than their minds." My father shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Nothing. He just sat there, cutting his prime rib, while his wife and her friends discussed my worth as a human being. I stood up slowly, my hands trembling with rage and humiliation. "Excuse me," I managed, my voice barely steady. "I need some air." "Of course, dear," Claire said sweetly. "The cold might be refreshing." "Do bundle up. We wouldn't want you catching something and missing work." Even her fake concern was poisonous. I grabbed my coat and stepped out onto the back terrace, gulping the freezing Denver air like it was medicine. The city sprawled below us, twinkling with New Year's Eve celebrations, while I stood there feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me. What happened next would change everything, but not in any way I could have imagined. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by someone who was supposed to be family? Drop a comment and let me know how you handled it. If you're enjoying this story of family drama and unexpected twists, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Because what I discovered the very next morning would turn Claire's perfect world completely upside down. The footsteps belonged to my father, who found me on the terrace with tears freezing on my cheeks and my breath forming angry clouds in the December air. "Sarah, honey, I'm sorry about that," he said quietly, closing the door behind him to muffle the sound of laughter and conversation from inside. "Claire doesn't mean anything by it. She likes to fit in with her friends." I turned to face him, and for the first time in years, I let him see exactly how much his silence had cost me. "Doesn't mean anything by it? Dad, she just told a table full of people that I'm suited for manual labor because I'm too stupid for anything else. And you sat there. You said nothing." He looked older suddenly, the lines around his eyes deeper in the harsh porch lighting. "I know how it looked, but how it looked." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dad, this is how it always looks. Claire humiliates me, and you make excuses for her. When was the last time you stood up for me? When was the last time you acted like I was actually your daughter, and not some embarrassing obligation you inherited from your first marriage?" The words hung between us like a bridge burning. My father opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, and I realized he didn't have an answer because there wasn't one. "I should go," I said, moving toward the door. "Sarah, please. It's New Year's Eve. Stay for midnight at least." I looked through the glass at Claire, who was entertaining her guests with what appeared to be an animated story, her hands gesturing dramatically, probably recounting my embarrassing exit for their amusement. I think I've provided enough entertainment for one evening. I left through the side gate, walking past the collection of BMWs and Mercedes in the driveway to my 10-year-old Honda Civic, which suddenly looked like a toy car among the luxury vehicles. As I drove away, I could see the warm glow of the party continuing without me, and I felt the familiar ache of being perpetually on the outside of my own family. I spent New Year's Eve alone in my small apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, watching the ball drop on TV while eating leftover Chinese takeout and wondering if Claire was right, if I really was a disappointment, destined for mediocrity while everyone else achieved greatness. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I was still in my pajamas at 10 a.m., nursing my second cup of coffee and scrolling through job listings online, when someone knocked on my door. I peered through the peephole and saw a man in an expensive-looking overcoat holding a leather briefcase. He appeared to be in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that comes from years of handling important matters. "Miss Matthews?" he said when I opened the door, keeping the security chain attached. "My name is Robert Hendricks. I'm an attorney with Hendricks, Walsh & Associates. I need to speak with you about your grandfather's estate." My grandfather? That caught me off guard. My paternal grandfather, Henry Matthews, had died when I was 15, but his estate had been settled years ago. Or so I thought. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been some mistake," I said through the crack in the door. "My grandfather's will was read 12 years ago." Mr. Hendricks smiled patiently. "There's been a recent development, Miss Matthews. A codicil to your grandfather's will was discovered in his safety deposit box, along with specific instructions about when it should be executed. I really need to speak with you in person. May I come in?" A codicil. I knew enough legal terminology from watching courtroom dramas to understand that meant an addition or amendment to a will. But why would there be one that no one knew about? I let him in, hastily clearing the coffee table of takeout containers and yesterday's newspapers. Mr. Hendricks sat on my small sofa, looking somewhat out of place in my modest living room with his expensive suit and serious demeanor. "Miss Matthews, what I'm about to tell you may come as quite a shock." He opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Your grandfather left specific instructions that this codicil was not to be revealed until January 1st of the year you turned 27, and only if certain conditions were met." "What conditions?" "That you were unmarried, financially independent through your own work, and..." He paused, consulting his notes, "that your stepmother had made what he termed her true nature clear to the family." My blood ran cold. He knew about Claire? But she didn't even meet Dad until after grandfather died. Mr. Hendricks shook his head. "According to these documents, your grandfather had been investigating Ms. Claire Davidson, that was her maiden name, for several months before his death. He'd learned that she had a pattern of targeting recently widowed men with substantial assets. Your grandfather became suspicious when she began showing up at places your father frequented just weeks after your mother's funeral." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. He knew she was, what, a gold digger? The private investigator your grandfather hired uncovered quite a bit of information about Ms. Davidson's previous relationships. 3 marriages to wealthy older men, all ending in divorce with substantial alimony settlements. A pattern of isolating her targets from their adult children and previous social connections. I thought about the past 5 years, how Claire had gradually convinced my father to move away from our old neighborhood, where my mother's friends lived, how she'd slowly replaced his social circle with her own, how she'd made me feel increasingly unwelcome at family gatherings until I'd almost stopped coming entirely. But why didn't he warn Dad? He tried, according to his notes. But your father was grieving and frankly besotted. Your grandfather realized that direct confrontation would only drive them closer together. So he did something much more strategic. Mr. Hendricks pulled out a thick document. He created this codicil as insurance. Insurance for what? For you, Miss Matthews. Your grandfather was very concerned about what would happen to you if his suspicions about Ms. Davidson proved correct. He felt that your father's judgment was compromised by grief and loneliness. Mr. Hendricks opened the document, and I could see my grandfather's distinctive handwriting in the margins, along with official legal stamps and signatures. The codicil states that if the conditions I mentioned were met, if you remained independent, and if Claire showed her true colors, then you would inherit the bulk of your grandfather's real estate portfolio, which was held in a separate trust that was not part of the original will reading. Real estate portfolio? I felt like I was speaking a foreign language. Your grandfather was quite the investor, Miss Matthews. Over the years, he quietly acquired commercial and residential properties throughout Colorado. Strip malls, apartment complexes, office buildings. The portfolio is currently valued at approximately $12 million. The words didn't compute. $12 million. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry, did you say 12 million? 12.3 million, to be precise, as of the last appraisal 6 months ago. The properties have been managed by a professional firm since your grandfather's death, with all proceeds reinvested. He was quite specific that you should inherit this wealth when you were mature enough to handle it responsibly, and when it would make the most impact in protecting you from those who might wish to exploit your family connections. I felt dizzy. Yesterday, I was the family failure, struggling to make rent on my small apartment and being told I was suited for manual labor. Today, I was being told I was a millionaire. There's more, Mr. Hendricks continued gently. Your grandfather left detailed instructions about how this information should be shared with the family and when. He handed me another document, this one in my grandfather's handwriting. Sarah, it began, if you're reading this, then my fears about Claire have proven justified. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from her cruelty, but I hope this inheritance will give you the power to protect yourself and show your father the truth about the woman he married. My hands were shaking as I continued reading. The timing of this revelation is not coincidental. Claire will have just finished humiliating you publicly. It's what women like her do when they feel secure in their position. She believes your father will always choose her over you. But now you have something she wants more than anything, the power that comes with real wealth. Use it wisely. I looked up at Mr. Hendricks, who was watching me with a mixture of professional detachment and human kindness. When do I need to tell them? According to your grandfather's instructions, we notify the family today. In fact, he specifically requested that your stepmother be present for the reading. He checked his watch. I'm scheduled to meet with your father and Mrs. Matthews in 2 hours to read the codicil. Your grandfather felt it was important that you be there as well. The thought of facing Claire and my father so soon after last night's humiliation made my stomach churn. But there was something else rising in my chest. Something I hadn't felt in years when it came to my family. Power. Have you ever discovered that someone was trying to manipulate your family? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're invested in seeing how this family drama unfolds, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the explosive confrontation that's coming. Because in 2 hours, I would walk back into that house, not as the family disappointment, but as the wealthiest person in the room. And Claire was about to learn that karma has perfect timing. 2 hours later, I sat in my father's study, watching Claire pace nervously while Dad tried to understand why a lawyer had requested an emergency family meeting on New Year's Day. This is highly irregular, Claire was saying, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her crossed arms. What could possibly be so urgent that it couldn't wait until business hours? I had arrived 15 minutes early, wanting to observe their reactions when Mr. Hendricks delivered the news. Claire barely acknowledged my presence, still believing I was the irrelevant family member she'd humiliated just 12 hours earlier. Sarah, I'm glad you came back, Dad said, though he looked confused about why I was included in what he clearly expected to be a routine legal matter. I hope last night didn't... Let's just see what Mr. Hendricks has to say, I interrupted, settling into the leather chair across from the desk where I'd once felt so powerless. Mr. Hendricks arrived precisely on time, carrying the same briefcase and wearing an expression of professional gravity that immediately commanded attention. Claire stopped pacing and took her position beside my father's chair, her hand possessively on his shoulder in a gesture I now recognized as territorial rather than affectionate. Thank you all for gathering on such short notice, Mr. Hendricks began, opening his briefcase with ceremonial precision. I'm here regarding the estate of Henry Matthews, specifically a codicil to his will that was sealed with instructions for execution on this precise date. Dad frowned. A codicil? But Father's will was settled years ago. Everything was distributed according to his wishes. Not everything. Mr. Matthews, your father created a separate trust for a substantial portion of his estate, with very specific conditions for its release. Claire's grip on Dad's shoulder tightened almost imperceptibly. I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was already wondering how this might affect her lifestyle. What kind of trust? She asked, her voice carefully controlled. Mr. Hendricks withdrew the documents I'd seen earlier, spreading them across Dad's desk. A trust containing a real estate portfolio valued at over $12 million, held in secret for the past 12 years. The silence in the room was absolute. Dad stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. Claire's face had gone pale beneath her expensive makeup. 12 million? Dad's voice was barely a whisper. But how? Why didn't we know about this? Your father was very specific about the conditions under which this trust would be activated, Mr. Hendricks explained. He required that the beneficiary reach the age of 27, remain financially independent, and that certain family dynamics he was concerned about prove themselves true. Claire's eyes darted between the lawyer and the documents, her mind clearly racing. What kind of family dynamics? Mr. Hendricks looked directly at her for the first time since entering the room. Mr. Henry Matthews hired a private investigator in the months before his death to research Claire Davidson. Your background, your previous relationships, your pattern of behavior with wealthy men. The color drained completely from Claire's face. That's invasion of privacy. Whatever he thought he found. 3 previous marriages to wealthy widowers, Mr. Hendricks continued impassively, reading from a file. Each ending in divorce within 5 years, each resulting in substantial alimony payments. A documented pattern of isolating your targets from their adult children and previous social connections. Dad turned to stare at his wife, confusion and dawning realization warring in his expression. Claire, what is he talking about? It's lies, she said quickly, but her voice had lost its usual confidence. Richard, you know me. We fell in love naturally. I would never... According to the investigator's report, Mr. Hendricks interrupted, you began appearing at locations Mr. Richard Matthews frequented within 3 weeks of his wife's death. The country club, his favorite restaurant, the bookstore where he bought his mystery novels. Each encounter was carefully orchestrated to appear coincidental. I watched my father's face as the pieces fell into place. The seemingly perfect woman who had appeared just when he needed comfort most, who had known exactly what to say, how to dress, what interests to suddenly develop that matched his own perfectly. The codicil states that if these suspicions proved accurate, if Claire Matthews, née Davidson, demonstrated what Mr. Henry Matthews termed her true predatory nature toward his family, then the trust would be activated immediately. Claire was shaking now, her carefully constructed facade crumbling in real time. This is insane. Even if any of this were true, which it isn't, how could a dead man know what would happen years later? Because, Mrs. Matthews, your grandfather understood patterns, Mr. Hendricks said, turning to me. He knew that once Claire felt secure in her position, she would begin systematically undermining Sarah's relationship with her father, making her feel unwelcome and inferior. He predicted that she would publicly humiliate Sarah when she felt most confident in her control over the family. Dad looked at me, and I saw the exact moment when he realized what had happened the night before. Last night, at dinner. Your grandfather's instructions were very specific, Mr. Hendricks continued. The trust activates when Sarah has been publicly humiliated by Claire in front of witnesses, demonstrating the toxic family dynamic he predicted would develop. Claire suddenly lunged forward, reaching for the documents. This is fraud. It has to be fraud. You can't give away $12 million based on some paranoid old man's conspiracy theories. Mr. Hendricks calmly moved the papers out of her reach. The will and codicil have been verified by 3 independent law firms and approved by the probate court. The transfer is completely legal and final. Transfer? Dad asked weakly. The entire real estate portfolio transfers immediately to Sarah Matthews, along with all proceeds generated over the past 12 years, which brings the total to approximately $13.8 million. The number hit the room like a bomb. Nearly $14 million. I was sitting there in my jeans and sweater from Target, suddenly one of the wealthiest people in Denver. Claire's mask finally fell completely. No, this is impossible. Richard, do something. Sue them. That money should be ours, yours. I'm your wife. A wife who married me for my money, Dad said quietly, his voice hollow. Isn't that right, Claire? You researched me, planned our meetings, manipulated my grief. It wasn't like that. But the lies stuck in her throat because we could all see the truth now. Actually, I said, speaking for the first time since Mr. Hendricks had arrived, it was exactly like that. And you made one crucial mistake, Claire. She turned to me with pure hatred burning in her eyes. What mistake? You underestimated my grandfather's love for me. And you underestimated me. I stood up slowly, feeling power settle around me like armor I'd never known I could wear. You see, grandfather knew that someone like you would never be able to resist showing your true nature eventually. He knew you'd feel so secure in your position that you'd stop pretending to be nice. Claire was backing toward the door, her designer heels clicking frantically on the hardwood floor. Richard, please. We can fight this. There has to be a way. The way, Dad said, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in years, is for you to leave. Now. You can't throw me out. I live here. I have rights. Mr. Hendricks consulted another document. Actually, Mrs. Matthews, according to the prenuptial agreement you signed, a copy of, which was provided to Mr. Henry Matthews by your own attorney, you waive all claims to real property in the event the marriage ends due to deceptive misrepresentation of your intentions or background. The prenup. She'd been so confident in her manipulation that she'd signed away her own protection. This isn't over, Claire spat, turning her venom on me. You think this money will make you happy? You think it will make your father love you more? You're still the same pathetic girl who couldn't even get a real job. Maybe, I said calmly. But I'm a pathetic girl with $13.8 million. How much do you have, Claire? The question hung in the air as she realized the full scope of her situation. No house, no husband, no income, and no legal claim to any of it. Dad stood up slowly, looking older but somehow relieved, like a man waking up from a long nightmare. Claire, I think you should pack your things, today. She left without another word, her designer heels echoing through the house as she climbed the stairs to pack up her carefully curated life. Mr. Hendricks finished the paperwork and left us alone. Dad and I sat in silence for a long time, processing the earthquake that had just reshaped our family. I'm sorry, Sarah, he finally said. I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. You were grieving, Dad. She knew exactly how to exploit that. Your grandfather was a smart man. Smarter than his son, apparently. We talked for hours that day. Really talked for the first time since before Mom died. We talked about grief, about manipulation, about the family we'd lost, and the relationship we wanted to rebuild. 3 months later, I used some of the inheritance to start my own design firm, hiring other freelancers who had been struggling like I once was. Dad and I have dinner every Sunday now, just the two of us, rebuilding the relationship that Claire had worked so hard to destroy. As for Claire, I heard she moved to Phoenix and is dating a recently widowed real estate developer. Some patterns never change, but some do. My grandfather's final gift wasn't just money. It was the power to reclaim my place in my family and the wisdom to recognize true love from calculated manipulation. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, karma arrives with a lawyer's briefcase and a $13.8 million surprise. Have you ever had someone underestimate you completely? Share your story in the comments below. If this tale of family justice resonated with you, make sure to subscribe for more stories of unexpected comebacks and family drama. Because sometimes the person everyone overlooks turns out to be the most powerful person in the room. My grandfather knew that, and now finally so do I.